For once, we'll stay on target.
There's not enough hours in the day.
Hello and welcome to the HACKADAY podcast. I'm Elliot Williams, editor-in-chief of HACKADAY.
And I'm Kristina Panos, assignments editor at HACKADAY.
This is episode 187. We'll be listening to The Sound of Gleeful Gerbils, The Song of the Hard Drive, and A Lipstick Pick Up a Lullaby. In the news this week, NASA crashed into an asteroid.
Deliberately. On
purpose. And sent video home. Did you get to see the videos of that?
I did. I was talking to Tom on Discord while it was happening.
That was so awesome.
I didn't realize that it was a first-person shooter for the longest time. I thought the small thing was headed for the big thing, and then it switched.
Until the surprise ending. I was looking at it. I was surprised how incredibly kind of egg-shaped and round that asteroid looked, except it was peppered with all these like little rocks. And I still desperately want to know what the scale of everything was. I wish there was like some kind of asteroid version of Banana for scale.
Yeah, well, yeah, we needed another camera going satellite behind it to film the crashing.
Exactly. Oh, there you go.
Send that back before it runs into the explosion.
A couple meter long selfie stick dangling out the back that sends one last picture.
Yes.
That would have been awesome. I mean, toward the end, some of those rocks look like they're, kind of normal human scale rock size, but I really have no idea.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, that's my guess. So I don't think it was a giant asteroid. I guess I could look all this up, but it was much more fun to just watch the video. Actually, I've already seen an animated GIF of some observations that people have made from terrestrial telescopes looking up at this, and you can see the asteroid's path. There have only been a couple days since it happened, so it's still kind of too early to say whether its path has changed or not, but you could definitely see like poof and dust cloud, even from telescopes here on Earth. So that's kind of cool too. Anyway, I think Tom has in mind a follow-up piece on that. So we'll get some of the details on the science as soon as that comes in. For now, go out there and watch a video of smashing into an asteroid.
This is a journey into sound.
What's that sound?
What's that sound?
All right, and that brings us to What's That Sound? Have you got one for me?
I do.
Fantastic.
It's in the vault.
I feel a little bit like a freeloader, but I actually love the challenge of doing the What's That Sound myself. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Mystery sound. Okay, you did the camera last time. Some other triggery mechanical thing. I think I've actually got this one. All right, final answer, Viewmaster.
Oh, how very wrong.
Oh, man! What is it? Okay, well, we'll have to bleep this out.
I thought it'd be super obvious.
It's always super obvious when you're picking the sound. Okay, so it's not a Viewmaster. Then it's gonna be a slide projector? No, totally not a slide projector. They have more clink noise.
Next guess, please.
I think I give up.
Oh, all right.
You can tell me what it is, but we'll cut this out.
I was just.
Oh man. Pretty good. Oh, yeah. Now that you say it, of course, it totally is. Oh, that's absolutely horrible. Good job.
Thank you.
Well, listeners out there, if you have a guess what this is, head on over to hackaday.com/podcast. Fill out the form that you'll find on the links page. Give us your best guess and the handle you'd like to be called on the air if you get it right.
2 for 2.
Kristina 2, Elliot 0. All right. Well, my first hack this week comes from YYZ Kevin Pi Pico W does PCMCIA, gets this IBM PC 110 online. That's a lot of letters. Somebody was joking in the comments that PCMCIA stands for PC Manufacturers Create Inscrutable Acronyms or something. I still can't remember what PCMCIA stands for. But the story here is fantastic. It's about getting an old laptop online connected to Wi-Fi a long time ago. Back when Windows 98 laptops roamed the earth, you could buy PCMCIA Wi-Fi cards and stick them in there, but they only supported the old encryption protocols and stuff like that. So if you've got a modern network, you could put one in, but it really isn't going to help you much. Instead, what YYZ Kevin is doing here is creating his own modern PCMCIA Wi-Fi card, except doing it super cleverly by pretending to be an Ethernet adapter and then having the Pi Pico W, little $6 development board, do the hard work of A, simulating PCMCIA to the laptop, and then B, connecting to Wi-Fi and shuttling the data between them. I think this is such a great hack. Like, you could imagine doing this by, I don't know what, taking an Ethernet card, the PCMCIA Ethernet card, and then maybe figuring out a way to like bodge Wi-Fi onto that. Maybe you could plug it into a Wi-Fi to Ethernet router or something. I don't know what you'd do. But this way is just so much cleaner, and I really love the way it leverages the Pico's strengths, which are these programmable input-outputs, and some previous work that Ian Scott, alias Polpo, has done. I'll throw the links in the show notes, on a project called Pico Gus, which is a Gravis ultrasound card emulator. Well, this one's ISA based, but that's actually the same format as PCMCIA under the hood. And this plugs into an old retro computer and gives it an emulated Gravis ultrasound card, again, on the Pico, using these PIOs, the programmable IOs. And I think that's fantastic that Kevin just basically stole the PCMCIA/ISA part from here, and the little chip already has Wi-Fi on it, so it's just a matter of routing the traffic in there. He picked the NE2000 Ethernet card, which is a super old standard. I guess it's kind of slow as Ethernet cards go, but it works on basically everything, including these old ancient laptops that he's trying to boot up. So I guess it's kind of the universal hack here. So I think that's also really sweet. Just the fact that you could pull all of this off for $6 in parts these days is really outrageous.
Parts you can get.
And parts you can actually get. A couple cool things came out of this for me. One was learning about this Pico Gus and the whole ability to emulate ISA on the Pico. I guess Kevin had tried to do it with an ESP32, but the kind of the latency in switching into and out of the interrupt service routines is too large to make it fit with the PCMCIA standards. And so he really did need to do this on the Pico. I guess he does some low-level stuff with a CPLD here, but that's just level shifting. In the comments, Eben Upton, CEO of Raspberry Pi, comes in and says, you might not have needed that CPLD because the Pico's inputs are probably 5-volt capable. Now, he does say that they couldn't test them to the 5.5 volts that you need to be 100% sure and to write down in the data sheet that the Pico is 5-volt tolerant. But he does strongly hint that you could probably get away with it if you wanted to. And that's really interesting information and straight from the horse's mouth. So it's also just super cool that he comments in the HACKADAY comment line. So thanks very much to Eben for dropping by the comments line. And otherwise, this is just a really cool project. I don't have any computers with PCIe CIA slots anymore. good riddance. Once back in the day, I bent some of those horrible little pins that are on the inside because I like jammed it in or there was something in the card. And that was just an absolute nightmare. I tried to get in there with like super long forceps to try to like straighten the pins out. And I eventually did get it working, but man, that's a form factor I am not sad to see go away.
My first hack this week, I chose a 3D printed marble run features neat elevator linkage. And boy, is that the truth. This one really moved me, and it's got to be the most uplifting hack that I saw this week. Pun fully intended. Oh, the marble run part is, I won't say run-of-the-mill, but it's pretty standard. It's got 6 ramps. The whole thing, when it moves in concert, it has really crisp, tight movements, and it actually lays down a pretty great beat when it gets going. So when you can see in the video after the break the very interesting linkage that's going on here, and I love that Greg always tends to color code things. Well, not color code, but color separate, color visualize, color organize the parts so you can better see what's going on. Oh, I should have mentioned earlier that he's using magnets to actually move the marbles from bottom to top in what turns out to be a 90-degree angle, which it's interesting to see how much linkage it takes to move in a 90-degree angle. And that makes me think about our arm discussion in the meeting about why emulate an arm in the food service industry for roboticizing the food service industry when you don't necessarily have to go to the trouble. And the example I recall us talking about was a donut machine.
Yeah.
Which those have been around forever, and there's a place near me that makes donuts to order, and it ends up being almost like Subway, and you get to watch the machine stir the dough and deposit it onto this conveyor belt and drop the donuts into the oil, and I forget how they get retrieved. I believe it's another conveyor belt, or they just get drained and pivoted in a basket, maybe.
Yeah.
And then, of course, all the toppings are human, but... Well, not human toppings. This isn't Soil and Green donuts.
That's horrible. Yeah, I mean, this one is just complex movement for its own sake, right? Like, this is a crazy linkage that one of which I've never seen that, picks from down low, translates it up top, but it's really like, I don't know what it's like. It reaches down and then it like reaches over. You really need to go watch this thing in motion. Of course, magnets are the secret to make everything work. It's really, really cool. It's a lot of crazy action to get out of one little motor and some 3D printed gears. There's
a YouTuber I believe we've covered before. I believe their name is Thang and then some numbers.
Oh,
and
yeah.
all they upload are really cool linkage videos that are color organized like this, so you can tell what's going on. Yeah. So it's like one of those come to life.
Do you have a link to that? We got to throw that in there.
Sure.
Actually, Greg Zumwalt comes into the comments here and mentions that his father designed a mechanism like this some 50 years ago, and he actually designed it after that one. It's an overly complex / awesome mechanical machine, but it's also an heirloom overly complex mechanical machine. That's even better. So this next hack dates from distinctly stranger times. Back in the days of fallout shelters, Dr. Marshall Brewser, who worked for Oak Ridge National Labs, probably the simplest radiation detector you already own. This was a quick hack where, in the case of global thermonuclear war, you went down to your fallout shelter and wanted to know if it was safe to come out, but for some reason, you didn't have your civil defense Geiger counter with you. The hack is that you could run a comb through your hair, generate enough static electricity that you could hold up a piece of cigarette paper with it, and then time how long it takes for the static to dissipate off the comb and drop the cigarette paper on the floor. The gimmick here is that ionizing radiation will dispel the static electricity off the comb. I guess it's if you've got a lot of alpha radiation. It's the opposite charge. Somebody's going to correct me on this. I'm not going to stand by what kind of radiation it is. That's
Won't
horrible.
be me.
That's horrible. I can't remember this. This was high school chemistry for me. I can't remember any of this. The gimmick is that with normal background radiation, should take kind of 15 seconds or so. It probably depends on the humidity for the paper to fall off. But if you have around 10 rads per hour, it'll apparently fall off really pretty much instantaneously. And so this kind of gives you an idea of how much radiation you're being exposed to with nothing more than the comb in your back pocket and a piece of cigarette paper. I guess you have to remember this is the 60s and everybody smoked back then.
If I may be so sacrilegious, believe Bible paper is similar.
Good idea. Which are you more likely to have in your fallout shelter? A stash of cigarettes or a Bible? Or both?
Yeah.
Yeah. Who's got a comb in their fallout shelter? Like you're worried about combing your hair after a nuclear apocalypse.
Well, like you said, it should be in your pocket already because you're a greaser and it's the 50s.
Ah, very good.
Oh, does it matter how much Brill cream residue is on your comb?
If you're a greaser, I think you can't build up any good static electricity. In fact, what's funny about this write-up, and particularly 50s, 60s, is that they suggest that it might actually be better to rub the comb on your wife's hair because she may have less greasy hair than you do. And even better still, if you have one in your fallout shelter, is a cat. So it says in the article, quote, "In this one case, a cat is better than a wife," end quote.
Wow. Take my wife, please.
Yeah, right? Ugh. The point is, this is actually a pretty reasonable way to detect dramatically unhealthy, granted, levels of radioactivity. And I had to look it up because 10 rads per hour, the rad is an outdated measure of radioactive exposure. And these days, people worry about sieverts of radiation, and that's a dose. And you can convert from rads to sieverts actually very conveniently by dividing by 100. And so I had to look all this up and figure out if 10 rads per hour was a lot or a little. And the answer is it's a good, healthy dose. And to quote Dr. Marshall Brucer himself, you don't want more than 100 rads. So if you're seeing 10 rads per hour, you have about 9 hours to build yourself a better bomb shelter. Another quote from the article. What's actually interesting about this is that I guess we'd read up on radiation exposure of astronauts going off to Mars, and NASA's threshold for kind of what's the acceptable amount of radiation they should take on the way to and from is actually also a sievert. So it's kind of funny that everything else that's changed scientifically since the 50s, the basic idea that you really kind of want no more than about a sievert of radioactive dose has remained constant from then to now. Pretty crazy. Along the way, of course, I went looking at all sorts of radiation doses, and you should too. Head on over to the EPA's website and calculate your radiation dose. It's kind of fun.
I was gonna say, about how many X-rays and bananas is that in licking Vaseline glass?
Yeah, well, that's the best about this, is that they calculate your radiation exposure fairly precisely by asking you reasonable questions like at what altitude you live. The strangest sources of radiation in the EPA calculator are, do you have porcelain crowns or false teeth? Which apparently will toss on another 7/100ths of a millirem per year, where basically, you're talking 26 millirems per year at sea level exposure. But if you have porcelain teeth, that throws on an extra kind of 0.1. If your luggage gets x-rayed when you walk through the airport, that's 0.002 millirems. If you use thoriated mantles while camping, it's 0.003 millirems.
Thoriated what now?
Thoriated mantles. Those are like those glowy Coleman camp lights. You know, the ones where you light it and it's got that little bag, glows
like
super bright?
A modern oil lamp?
Yeah.
Okay.
Those bags glow super bright because they have thorium in them. And Well, it's hot. But the funniest one is that if you have a smoke detector in your house, and this is, I guess, one of the ones with americium in it, that gives you an extra 0.008 millirems per year. Or if you live within 50 miles of a nuclear power plant, that gives you an extra 0.009. I'm shocked that both of these are on there, and I guess I'm totally reassured that living close to a nuclear power plant is only as much exposure as having a smoke detector. If you live within 50 miles of a coal-fired power plant, you have 3 times as much radiation exposure as either the smoke detector or the nuclear power plant. So, coal ash, yo. Anyway, this is a lovely, lovely calculator to figure out how much radiation you receive. It's worth noting that this comb and cigarette paper test is only really useful if you've got a lot of radioactivity to be worried about. And I was trying to think of how I could test it out myself, like to do my due diligence as a HACKADAY writer and let you guys know if it really works. And the answer is I don't think I can think of a radiation source that strong. And even if I could, I don't think I'd get near it. X-ray tube. You could rub the comb and the cigarette paper and then hold it up to an X-ray tube.
For my next hack, I chose Frank's building an old guitar from a new one. What's that you say? Building an old guitar from a new one? That's right. Frank built what I am calling the Frank Electro, which is more precisely a Danelectro DC-59. So the Danelectro is a mid-century guitar, meaning last century, meaning 1950s, 1960s. They reissued them in the 90s using plywood bodies. So that is the approach that Frank took here. And I don't know about you, but when I hear plywood, when I read plywood, I don't get a great feeling. I don't know. But then I watch the video. I see him start putting it together. I'm like, okay, yeah, that'll work. So the body is plywood, and then on the top and bottom faces, those are hardboard. And where the new guitar comes in is he got an $80 Strat off of Kijiji or Craigslist or something and used most of the parts, the neck and everything that implies, the electronics, but not the most important part that makes it a Danelectro, which would be the pickups, the lipstick pickups. He went with real Danelectro pickups there. I would argue that the distinctive pickguard is also quite important to making it look like a Danelectro. He really put a lot of work into this. The one thing I would have not bothered with at all myself was converting the Strat's bridge tailpiece into a top-loading bridge tailpiece by filing the slots and then repolishing it back. It just looked like it took forever. And I would have probably just gone on StewMac or whatever and bought a Danelectro bridge tailpiece. One of the most appealing things about the Frank Electro for me was that it was built with common tools like a jigsaw, an electric sander, a basic sander at that, not even an orbital sander, and a drill.
I'm to the part of the video now where he's playing it. It sounds good.
Yeah, it does.
Success. And it actually does look pretty good, too.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. All right. Last time we had a guitar build, somebody sent in a video in the links. I might have to go chase that up for y'all because it was like the definitive test about what parts of a guitar matter for its sound. And he ends up with, basically the pickups, some part of the bridge, the distance to the frets, which is, like a tuning and setup issue, and that's it. In the end, the quote guitar that he has made is like a 2x4 with stuff strapped to it. And does tone wood matter? And the answer is this is a 2x4.
I mean, for an acoustic, yes, absolutely. For an electric, unless it's like hollow body electric or semi-hollow body, but
Yep.
I don't have any of those.
I was surprised to see it kind of so definitively demonstrated that actually all that matters is the pickups. Next up, this is a new post from Ken Sheriff exploring Texas Instruments' forgotten CPU. If somebody walked up to you on the street and said, what is the first microcontroller CPU? You'd probably say like the Intel 8008, or maybe you'd say the 4004. But in this post, Ken is making the very good case that it's probably actually the Texas Instruments TMX 1795 had its nose out in front of the 4004 by like a month. Anyway, whichever it is that's the first, it's kind of, academic and unimportant. But what goes on here is the really interesting story of the development of the first single chip CPUs. It's really fun the way he tells it, because it starts with the data point 2200, which was basically a terminal, a dumb serial terminal, except this one was a little bit programmable. It had a CPU on it. So back in the day, back in 1970 in this case, the processor wasn't a chip. It was a whole daughter board with a slew of TTL logic chips on it. And so this was the brains of the data point 2200. And the story of the first on-chip microprocessors is that DataPoint went to Intel and said, can you figure out a way to take this entire daughter board and put it on one chip for us, because we've got heat problems? And the Intel people said, yeah, maybe we can do that. And they went off and did it. And at least if you listen to the way the DataPoint people tell the story, by the time Intel came back to them with a single chip processor, which would be the 8008 design, they'd actually come up with a better switching power supply and didn't need a lower temperature single chip solution at all anymore. And so it was moot. Along the way, Intel ended up making the 8008 single chip microprocessor. But Intel was taking so long that DataPoint also went to TI, and a TI salesman learned about this, and he decided to also make their daughter board on a chip for them. And so what you've got is two of the chip giants in America in 1970, Intel on one side, TI on the other side, both of them copying this daughter board processor from the DataPoint 2200 and making what would, depending on which side you believe, both of them made kind of the first microprocessor chips. The TI one never got off the ground. It was bigger than the Intel version. And again, like I said, by the time either of these chips came out, DataPoint had solved their heat problems by using a switching power supply and didn't need either of them. The Intel 8008 would go on to become a bestseller for them, actually, and really like the first modern integrated microprocessor chip. So that's actually really interesting. Ken kind of takes the bigger perspective view on all of this and says that they both came out like within months of each other, and it's kind of moot which one actually did it first. It had been clear since the 60s that it was possible, at least, to take all of these components on a daughter board processor like this and shrink them down and fit them on a chip. It just wasn't ever clear to anyone why you'd want to do it. And the answer, of course, came in the intervening decade or so as what would then become Moore's Law shrunk the size of transistors, and, the rest is computer history. It's really a great story here of kind of the inside details of one microprocessor, which may have been the first or may have been the other first microprocessor, the Texas Instruments TMX 1795.
For my third hack, I chose Garrett Morrison's This Found Sound Organ was made with Python and a laser cutter. So what this is a click wheel organ that works on the playing card in your bike spokes principle, but each note gets its own playing card. And it kind of sounds like a chorus of grocery carts, each with a single squeaky wheel. Or a group of Gleeful Gerbils. You really just have to watch the video to appreciate it, but I'll try to explain what's happening. Each tone wheel is laser cut out of thin plywood, and they all have teeth around their outer circumference. So they all spin in concert on the same axle, and then there are reeds resting very close to each one. And to play a note, you press the reed against the wheel. And it works pretty well. The polyphonics need a little bit of work, because when you play enough notes, it slows the whole thing down, which, of course, messes with the sound. But some people are into that kind of thing. Oh, honestly, it was an experimental proof of concept, supposed to be temporary, like a rubber band guitar, but more skookum and longer lasting. But I think it sounds great for what it is. And I might have to make one.
It sounds surprisingly squeaky for like the card and the spokes effect, which I think is the best analogy here I've ever seen. I think you could just run the wheels slower and it would be lower pitched. So no problem with changing the pitch on the thing. I think it's absolutely hilarious that you actually just play it by pushing the little cards into the like spinning gear wheels. It's so cool. Garrett says there's a Arduino running a PID loop trying to stabilize the speed of the spinning wheels, but there's probably more to do. He might add a big heavy flywheel to it to kind of keep the wheels all spinning at the same speed and help out with that problem you mentioned about playing too many notes at once. But yeah, this thing is bonkers. Well, it's got 3 octaves. That is a lot of laser cutout flywheels. I also really like his use of multiple laser cut gears sandwiched together where he actually has to use the gears as gears. Like it keeps the 2 registers running at the same speed because they're driven by 2 gears of the same size. And there he actually wants more contact than you'd get if you just had, whatever it is, 1/8" plywood or whatever. So he actually looks like he glues...
It's like 4 at least.
Right? And it makes a really big old thick gear wheel. And that's actually a really cute application. There's a whole bunch of cool laser cut wood tricks going on here in this thing's fabrication now that I look at it. Check it out if you got a laser cutter, which I don't.
How easy would it have been to make the anti-key thrower mechanism if you had Python to spit out your numbers of teeth that you needed?
And a laser cutter to cut it out for you.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd be done in a day. My first quick hack this week comes from Kiwi H. Trojans can lurk inside AVR bootloaders. This isn't so much you should be scared of this hack as a really cool proof of concept. It uses the fact that the AVR family of chips has a flag that you can use to take over the interrupt routines. And so in this case, it calls the code that's in the bootloader every time it does an interrupt, does its malicious deeds, whatever that would be, and then calls the interrupt routine as normal. Next up, Matthias Werner, Tiny Dongle brings the hard drive song back to updated retro computers. This is a little piezo noisemaker that you can put into a simulated retro computer that makes the clicky noises that old running hard drives used to. So if you're wondering if your old Windows 3.1 system is still loading or if it's crashed, if you can hear the hard drive clicking, you know it hasn't crashed yet. And last up, Atomic, this scratch-built X-ray tube really shines. This is a walkthrough of his building of an X-ray tube. I love that Dan starts this off with, this is something you should never do, because... unless you have a comb, I guess, and some cigarette paper on hand.
And we've gone meta.
But it's a really great look into what it takes to make your own vacuum tubes and also kind of the technology behind not 1 but 2 different kinds of X-ray tubes. Really cool. It looks like there was a lot of work went into this. Atomic says the most important tool in his arsenal is patience, and he had to do it a number of times before getting one that would work, but this one really gets his Geiger counter clicking.
For my first quick hack this week, I chose Coverton's add full color images to your 3D prints with toner transfer. Wow, this one blew up. Coverton is laser printing the mirrored version of whatever graphic they want printed on the piece onto a transparency, a clear piece of plastic. So they set that aside. They 3D print the first layers of the 3D print for registration purposes. Tape down one edge of the transparency, line it up, remove the plastic from the 3D print, throw some water on the bed, slap the transparency down, squeegee the water out, tape the other 3 sides down, adjust the hot end to compensate for the transparency's thickness, and resume the 3D print. I'm curious to know how long it took to master this technique, but I am among the many people who slapped their heads and said, why didn't I think of this? And I want to try it. Next up is Stephen Cass's Trash 80 Model 100 gets Arduino heart transplant. So Stephen Cass combined 2 dead Trash 80 Model 100s to make one functional one and had a heap of parts left, if only it had a brain. So he threw an Arduino Mega 2560 in there, and the complicated bit was hooking up the weirdo Nito LCD that this thing had. It had 10 different zones that were further divided into banks, and each of these 10 zones had its own driver chip. They did this so they could have a big screen, basically, and drive it back then without overburdening the processor. As new writer Dave Walker puts it, welcome Dave Walker. And for my third quick hack, I chose Lixie Labs' The Sensory Bridge is your path to a desktop rave. This is a low latency music visualizer. Basically, it turns music into light shows, and in order to do that in real time, it has to work very quickly. So it picks up the music with an onboard MEMS microphone, and it uses an ESP32S2 doing FFT to update the RGB array in real time. Add that to the list of take my money, please.
That brings us to our can't miss articles. These are long form pieces written by our fantastic HACKADAY staff. This week I picked Al Williams's A Love Letter to Small Design Teams and the B-52. It's a combination of ideas from Al's kind of long career. First, he starts off with the story of the design of the B-52, which strangely enough was originally designed by a team of 4 or 6 people in a cramped hotel room over a very short period of time. And this for a bomber that's actually still flying around after, 50-something years? Who knows? Not bad for a group of people who designed it in a hotel room. Of course, it was tested and refined and etc. over a much longer period of time. So it's not like, they just started cranking them out the next week. But the idea for the airplane itself did come out during this kind of small group work in a small team over a small period of time brainstorming session. And that, I think, is the larger point that Al wants to make. The rest of the article is him thinking about big teams versus small teams and how hard it is to get large groups of people to kind of all do the same thing and all agree on the same project and push them all in the same direction. And that's kind of an extraordinarily difficult management challenge. I love the way he explains it here. He's like, if you have 2 people, the chances that they'll have, all the same goals are pretty small, but maybe they can kind of negotiate it. And then you throw a third person in, and the chances of that working are even smaller. And then, now a team of 40 people or 100 people, it's like there's no chance that everyone will have the same vision, the same ideas, the same, goals, priorities. And so you kind of really do have to corral them all in there. And that's what makes small teams work better, is that it's just there are kind of fewer viewpoints that need aligning to get everyone on the same page. And I think that's an interesting insight here. But he also goes on to say, of course, there's projects that are just too big for small teams. And there you have to spread them out to, lots more people to get the work done. And so he kind of concludes with, should you never have big teams? And he says, well, if you can get the same work done with a smaller team, it'll probably be done better and faster. But if you just can't get it done, if it's something like, taking the airplane from after it's, here's the design idea, and then, getting the thing built, of course, you're going to need a whole bunch of people to do so. And that's where, you need this kind of other skill and you need the bigger team. It's just a really neat article about the kind of role of small teams in brainstorming and thinking things up and creating the ideas, doing the design work, and then bigger teams maybe in pushing that idea along later and developing on it afterwards. Yeah, but I've definitely seen this in my own life, like, for instance, at a hackerspace. So it's kind of interesting. I mean, Al's thinking about small teams, large teams on the, hundreds of people size, and I'm thinking of it on the 2 people versus 10 people size. I think it's useful to think about either way.
Small teams for decisions, large teams for precisions. For my Can't Miss article, I dug deep and chose my own, cursing the curse of cursive, which, despite the title, is sort of the preamble, I guess, to my love letter to writing by hand, which I like doing for lots of reasons. You almost might call it hypergraphia, maybe.
Ooh.
But yeah, I'm not alone. It helps me think. It helps me get the words out that I want to get out. It helps me come up with new ideas. It sort of just sets me free, like the way that closing my eyes does when the stuff in my office is too much. I don't know, like when I need to focus and be somewhere else, but I can't. So I just close my eyes and block it all out. Like it's just you and your hand and the paper. And
I totally share that with you.
You do?
Need to write stuff down. Especially, I find it especially useful when I'm in a creative mode to be able to write stuff down on paper. And I'll often outline a long form HACKADAY article on a piece of paper before I even write it down, because it's just somehow nice for me to have all my thoughts in one place. But I think there's something quick and immediate about writing it that just, gets it on the paper and gets me on to the next thing. Designing stuff, I absolutely need to draw it out on paper first.
That's funny that you say that, because lots of times if I'm trying to outline a longer form, sometimes I'll just start writing prose instead of pseudocode.
Right? Yeah.
And I write so much stuff down on paper that I have to change colors or it just becomes noise, like visual noise.
Right.
Like even my to-do list, I use thin markers and change colors every other line, so it doesn't just become another piece of handwritten paper on my desk.
Right on.
I've got little whiteboards, big whiteboards. Yeah, I got it all.
Yeah, but there is something about writing, and I don't know. I mean, there have been all these science studies about it and stuff, and I don't know how much I put in them. I wonder how much of that is learned, how much of it is I associate writing with brainstorming because I always used to do it that way, or how much of it is, actually something physical about moving my hand around.
I think it's physical. I think it goes back to our finger painting days, and I think that ties back to our cave wall drawing days.
Speak for yourself. I'm not that old.
I recall when I was small.
Anyway, in this article, you end up talking about all sorts of crazy different cursives and fonts like that. And it's pretty funny because my son, he learned to do cursive in 2nd grade and writes now with this really kind of hyper stylized kids German cursive. And some of the letters, I don't even recognize them. It's actually a very particular style. And I didn't even realize that there were all these different cursive styles in, kind of American usage too. I thought this was a weird German thing. And then in this article, you link to whatever Danielian cursive and stuff like this. I mean, it's not that different from what I learned, but I think I must have went to Catholic school, taught to write cursive by nuns. I think I learned which one of these, if I look. Well, mine's not exactly like that either. No, I don't know. I might have learned Catholic nun cursive.
And there's that real specific teacher cursive.
All of your kind of American samples look pretty similar, except for the capitals. And let's be honest, who even writes capitals in cursive? Do you?
Sometimes. I spend a lot of time trying to get my capital G right because I think of General Mills. I wanted it to look like the General Mills logo.
Oh, that one's weird. Yeah, right?
Yeah, it looks like a sailor's knot of some kind or something.
Yeah, it's got one too many loops and reverses in it for me.
Yeah.
It looks like almost like a treble clef or something.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I spent a lot of time learning how to draw a treble clef and also distinguishing it from dollar signs and
exactly.
ampersands.
Yeah. I wonder if I could do an ampersand if you forced me. Hold on, I'm gonna try it right now. No, that's a treble.
But which one are you doing? There's so many different ones.
I just did a treble clef, so you.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Basically, just reverse your treble clef.
Oh man, I can't even picture it. Like it's got a loop and then a.
Basically, you make like a
Squirrely
backwards
thing.
3 and a T, and you cross a capital T, but with a little T tail, and then you. Yeah,
I think
because
I
it's
almost
supposed to
made
be
your-
ET together.
Yeah, I think I almost just made your funny G though by accident. Anyway, super neat article. I think
Oh, thank you.
really fun, and a lot of people like came in the comments and had all sorts of crazy different scripts of their own to add to it.
I'm just getting warmed up.
Oh man.
Buckle your seatbelts. Get out your triangle-shaped pencil grips to make it more comfortable. Stay tuned for my dad's super cool handwriting.
Coming up in cursive episode 2.
Yes.
All right. That about does it for this week's Hackaday podcast. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to leave a comment or check out our cool links, head over to hackaday.com/podcast. If you see anything cool or do anything cool, send us an email, tips@hackaday.com. And until next week,
Keep on hacking.
and then we're set. Check out our cool links.
At least they're not going to hurt me at the periodontist this time.
In the news this week, Nashwa. In the news this week. The comb and the cigarette. It came back.